How's everybody doing? I hope you hear me. I'm doing my meetings or my recordings through Zoom now instead of just my camera. Seems like I'm really up close here, but I just wanted to go through some more of the fallacies a little bit with you, and then I'll post an assignment that has to do with comparing Eastern and Western worldviews. But the big thing is, I hope, especially my seniors in this class, that you're not losing heart, that you're staying positive. I know this isn't easy for you. I miss you guys a lot. I think about it every day, actually. Just engaging and talking about ideas. And I know you've got a lot more on your plate than that in terms of your proms and your graduation and things like that. I'm continuing to be hopeful that by the late spring, early summer, that some real firm plans will be made for you. And that it'll be special in its own way. And hopefully you can look at it and look back at this as a time where it will be special, that other classes haven't, maybe been able to do this. I know there's going to be coming a lot of sacrifice with this, I'm sure. But man, I hope somehow we can make it up to you, and you can have that experience that you truly deserve. So anyways, what I want to do is kind of talk to you a little bit about fallacies of diversion, okay? So a diversion is basically something that gets you distracted, all right? So right now, if you're watching this video and someone slammed a door in the other room, or if my cat walked in here right now, that would be a diversion for me. Actually, I had some music playing while I was kind of typing some stuff up, which was kind of a mistake because I really love music, and then I get distracted. Like, there's this band from the 90s called Oasis. Don't Look Back in Anger was a song I've heard the last few days, and I missed it somehow. It's a great song. If you want to look that up, I really like that song. You're probably like, what is this? Anyways, so that was a diversion for me. And what I just did was a diversion to you because I started talking about something other than philosophy. Okay. Now, the big one I want to look at is something called a red herring. All right. So have you ever wondered when you've watched movies or something, if you were a criminal or maybe an innocent person that was being chased by dogs, okay, how you would get away from that? They got your scent, they're chasing you up into the mountains. What would you do to get away from that? Well, a red herring is something that was used to get the scent of you. Say you were being chased by dogs, get the scent, get the dogs distracted. So you drag a herring, which is like a fish, okay, across the path, and now the scent of the dog is distracted and diverted, and it starts going that way. Okay. Now, as far as argumentation goes, this is done all the time. So you're arguing with somebody about something, and all of a sudden you go down this whole other road, and you say to yourself, "How did we get here?" It happens in class all the time, but really, as far as argumentation goes on, this is a fallacy that gets people focused on something other than the issue at hand, okay? And it sidetracks the discussion away from what is truly the discussion is supposed to be about. Some examples, there's a dialogue in the book that talks about ending de facto segregation, which is the segregation that occurs because people choose to live that way. For instance, Connecticut schools in Hartford are segregated, not because it's legally, legal segregation, but de facto segregation. It happens that way because certain ethnicities and people with similar cultural backgrounds live together in the same part of the town. So when a school opens up, that the demographics of that school may be one race, okay? And so there's been a lot, Sheff versus O'Neill is a Supreme Court decision that talks about this idea that forced integration is something that we should look at, busing people to a different school to bring more diversity into that school, kind of forcing it. But the dialogue in the book talks about this issue of segregation. One person says to the other one, "Oh, you're so idealistic," and idealism is always an enemy of what actually works, okay? So now the conversation goes to idealism works in every society. That's how the best ideas Now, idealism here, not to confuse you, I don't mean the one that we studied in philosophy. This is like ideal, okay? Um, you have, you know, almost utopianism, right? Perfect idea, and this is the ideal. Let's shoot for that. So the other person starts arguing about how idealistic arguments are not good. The other one says, yes, they are. They change society. So instead of talking about segregation, they've gone down this whole road of idealism, okay, of utopianism and things like that. So the actual argument has been diverted. All right, it's become about something else. There was an individual during the Carter administration that was accused of chief of staff, actually, I believe, who was accused of spitting on somebody in a bar. So that became national news. And one of the reporters made a joke and said the Carter administration has gone from great expectations to great expectorations. You know, making a joke about this spit and the, you know, the things that came out of the individual's mouth. Now, you might say, well, how is that a diversion? Well, instead of talking about whether this guy was guilty or not, a joke was made, and now it kind of carries the day. And so think of what would happen today. That was in the 70s. Today, the networks would pick this up and haha, you know. And so before you know it, there's a little bit of a diversion here. You're talking about something that's funny, and it's taking the focus off of the issue at hand. Another way to do this is to take something that somebody meant figuratively and make it literal and attack it, okay? So somebody says in terms of crime or something, you'd have an easier time living in a jungle than you would in that neighborhood. Okay, now clearly the person is making an exaggeration, right? That this neighborhood is so bad, it's almost like a jungle. So now the other individual, this person said that it would be easier to live in a jungle. Well, let me tell you, there's 30 types of species in a jungle that can kill you. And you think it'd be easier to live there? Well, we shouldn't vote for this guy. Think about the lot, you know, and so they get attacked. It technically, you know, something that somebody meant to be taken as a, you know, kind of a purposeful exaggeration to make a point is now being attacked as a literal claim, right? You can see how that would divert the issue. It gets the issue way off of what's the condition in the neighborhood, right? What's the crime rate onto this guy thinks it's a jungle. If some of you probably watch The Office, and a great example of that is an episode where Michael Scott, for those of you who don't know, he's the boss in The Office, and he's like clueless, right? He's politically incorrect. He doesn't get it. And somebody comes into the office one day, and he did some time. They found out, like for some misdemeanor. He ends up in jail. So they're talking about this, and Michael's very thin-skinned. He gets hurt very easily as a boss. So someone makes the argument that prison sounds like a lot of fun. They start asking him questions about prison, and they're like, "Boy, prison's better than this place." So the whole episode, Michael takes it very personally, gets them in a big meeting, and to convince them that the office is actually better than prison. So he becomes Prison Mike. Okay, he tries to scare him straight. It's really an hysterical episode. And anyways, he ends up, he gets so mad at them because they're still talking about prison, that he locks them in the office and says, "Here, you want prison? Now you got prison." And so he's sitting there with his arms folded like a child, you know, and they're pounding on the door and they're mad. And the human resource guy, who Michael always picks on, has a moment where Michael actually listens to him, comes up and says, "Michael, you know, they really don't think this place is like prison. They're having fun with you. They're making fun of this situation." And Michael has like this aha moment, and then he lets him out of the room. Now they're really mad at him. But it's a good example of something that's being taken as kind of a purposeful exaggeration to make a point. You take them literally. It diverts the attention off of the issue at hand. Another would be a personal attack. If you're in an argument with somebody over an issue, and somebody personally attacks you, you're no longer, in many cases, able to focus on the issue. You now are in the defense mode. So you start defending yourself against the personal attack, an ad hominem attack, like we learned about before. So that's a red herring too, because now you've been diverted off the major issue, and you're on to defending your character or yourself in that situation. How about a nitpicking or petty objection? This is another form of a red herring or a tactic of diversion. So let's say I said something like, "We are $100,000 in debt in this country." Say not our country, because that's way less. All right, that's like trillions of dollars. But let's say that our school district is facing a debt of $100,000. And someone takes me to task because the actual number is $99,100. And they say, you erroneously stated that we were $100,000 in debt. And in reality, it's just $99,100. And I think that's a good example of why no one should listen to you. And do you think it's okay to say something like that that's so factually wrong, when virtually everybody in the room would understand that it's a round figure to point to rounding up in that case to make a point? So that's a way you can divert the issue too. Some people, we do this all the time, right? We get a general figure there. And this goes back to playing games with numbers. Did you ever wonder why stores will sell you something for $7.99 instead of $8? The reason for that is because the 7 tends to stick in your mind rather than the 8, right? $7.99 sounds better than $8, even though it's only a matter of a penny. So that's why they do that, though. And so the diversion here in an argument, that's called nitpicking or petty objection. And then another one you can do is feigning ignorance. Okay. So let's say we're talking about something controversial and someone's making a big point. And I just said, I don't really get what you're saying. Can you rephrase that? Right? And so now the individual might be making the best case that he or she can about an issue. And now because I feigned ignorance, they have to use different terms than the one they were using. And I keep feigning ignorance. And so now we're getting further and further maybe away from what the issue is. You're being diverted. Because I may be using very clear language, but the individual just doesn't seem to be getting it, right? And so now I've got to use less than ideal categories to make my argument. And before you know it, we're being diverted, right? I sound less sure of my argument. This happens all the time too, okay? Actually, it can happen in journalism, dealing with a public figure, anything like that. Okay, so that's just what I wanted to go over there. The next thing I want to do when we're talking about metaphysics is to look at the idea of Western worldviews versus Eastern worldviews in the terms of what is real, okay? I'm going to read you just a brief story concerning Alexander the Great, which is going to get to kind of the difference between Eastern and Western worldview. Alexander the Great was king of the Macedonians and one of the greatest generals in history. He conquered the Persian Empire, which stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to India. Alexander's conquests furthered the spread of Greek ideas and customs in Western Asia and Egypt. Alexander made his epic pillage fueled on zeal, situational pride, intelligence, and a bit of philosophy. Young Alexander was a student of the great philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle, the father of science, is the philosopher who really began to shape the worldview that led to the scientific method in our current fact-driven culture. Alexander was a diligent student. Upon his father's death, Alexander became king, and the lessons in philosophy were not forgotten. As his conquest pushed further east into Persia and eventually India, Alexander's keen interest in philosophy was growing bored with the discussions of those around him. So when he heard of some gurus while in India, he jumped at the chance to meet them and talk philosophy. What's interesting about this is in the 1960s, this happened too. During the era of Woodstock, late 60s, people became enamored with Eastern philosophy. And they actually, the Beatles traveled to India to meet with Yogi, the guru in India, and learned about transcendental meditation. If you watch the Woodstock video, actually, you can see them engage in this a little bit. So this fascination with the East has been a reoccurring theme as far as thought goes. After gathering translators of all shapes and sizes, they were able to begin the discussion that Alexander the Great was so anxious to have with the gurus. Alexander's companions traveled out with translators to where the gurus sat. Alexander saw the Indian philosophers sitting nearly naked on big, flat, hot rocks. Alexander the Great inquired, "I came from the West. I am a mighty man and have studied under the greatest of our philosophers. I now wish to talk philosophy with you. The translators gathered the message and delivered it to the old men. After a short while, the old men told the translator to tell Alexander, we cannot talk philosophy with you now. After you sit on a rock for 50 years in the hot sun, then we can begin. Alexander, being a busy man, left one of his most trusted advisors there to learn from the gurus. Some time went by, and one day the advisor left behind caught up with Alexander to tell him about the Indian philosophy. Alexander asked, what have you learned from these old men about philosophy? The advisor looked at Alexander, then burst into flames and disappeared. And this was the West's first encounter with Eastern philosophy. So just a little story to kind of think about, what does this mean, right? And there's layers of interpretation here. If you go back to our chart on worldviews that we studied, one of the things that's important to many branches of Eastern philosophy is this idea of the extinction of the individual and all being one. Okay, so there's a song, if you remember, we talked about called "Dust in the Wind" from Kansas. We're just a drop of water in an endless sea. So this idea of being enlightened to the point where you lose your individual identity and you become the great oneness of everything. Okay. I'm just going to go to your sheet that I downloaded here. Let me see if I can find it. There it is. I'm going to share this. Okay. So there's, hopefully you can see this. I think you can. There I am. This is comparative worldviews, and you're going to read the worldview description and apply them to the statements below. Identify each statement as either W for Western or E for Eastern. Give a short explanation for each answer and be prepared to explain your responses. Okay. So if you look at the description, it talks about Descartes. We'll talk more about cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I exist, or I think therefore I am. And then the Isaac Newton worldview. And the Eastern worldview you see there where it says it can be stated simply all is one. All right. So you got to go 1 through 10 and give me either Eastern or Western. And then here in 1 or 2 sentences, explain how the Western worldview is different from the Eastern worldview, and be prepared to share your answer. Okay. So let me just go back to my screen here. Let's see. Stop share. There we go. So that's what I'm going to ask you to do. It's uploaded there. Okay. So just fill that out. And that'll be it. Okay. So we're going to continue to look at some different metaphysical worldviews and get into epistemology rather quickly. So hang in there. Keep engaging your mind, and looking forward to seeing you virtually soon. And I will see you then. Take care of yourselves.